Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today's guest is New York Times bestselling author and speaker Christopher Ryan. Chris's work has been translated into over 20 languages and appeared all over, including Netflix, HBO, MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, NPR, The New York Times, The Times of London, Playboy, The Washington Post, Time, Newsweek, National Geographic, and The Atlantic, to name just a few. Chris has been a featured speaker at TED, SXSW, the Festival of Dangerous Ideas at the Sydney Opera House, the Portland Comedy Festival, the Einstein Forum in Potsdam, Germany, and is a frequent guest on the Joe Rogan Experience and many other podcasts. He's provided expert testimony in a Canadian constitutional hearing, won a coveted AVN award for Best Non-Sex Performance in Marriage 2.0, and popped up in dozens of documentary films and television shows. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review at the top of the show page on Spotify or at the bottom of the show page if you are listening on Apple Podcast. Your opinions matter, and your ratings help us to grow and help more people to be healthy, find freedom of body and mind, and to live their dreams. We hope you enjoy today's episode with Paul and Chris on sex and relationship.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today, we are going to have a very interesting dialogue with a super interesting man, Chris Ryan, one of the key authors of the book Sex at Dawn, which I read quite some time ago. Chris, how long has your book been out?
Came out in 2010.
2010. So, I remember when it was a big buzz, and because I've been in multiple partner relationships for 25 years, people immediately started getting a hold of me and going, have you seen this book? Have you read this book? You should really check it out. And so I got the hard copy and I read some of it, but I listened to it on Audible twice or on one of the audiobook formats. And I took so damn many notes, I had to go through it again because I lift weights and listen to audiobooks and take notes on my rest periods. But oftentimes I feel like I'm missing so much. So I go through it a second time and I realize, wow, there's a pile of stuff I missed. But I went through it very thoroughly and I absolutely loved it. I thought that your concepts were bang on. And I've studied a lot of this stuff myself. And I've looked at a lot of tribal societies and their beliefs around mating and monogamy versus multiple husbands and wives and all the different types of relationships out there. So having had some background in it and a lot of experience in it, I was really excited to see a book of this quality really giving some history and some depth and some honest evaluation. So I want to start by just saying thank you for writing such an amazing book.
Well, thank you. That's amazing to hear. As you know, it's the first book I wrote. I had no contacts in publishing. I had really no idea that it would even get published. The whole thing has just been an incredible long shot. And to hear someone like you, express those sorts of thoughts is really touching and gratifying. So thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, credit where credit's due, I say. I'd love it, Chris, if you could share some background information on what experiences in your life led you to writing the book with, how do you say your co-author's name?
Casilda Jetta.
Okay, yes. Because, a book like that, I didn't get the impression that your book was an academic review of literature and a cut and paste kind of production. I really got a sense that there was something inside of you that was being expressed as well, like something, it had that ring of authenticity to it, not like just an academic book saying, here's a bunch of facts, but I got the sense that these authors know what they're talking about. It's not just an intellectual combination of ideas. So I think to lay the groundwork for our dialogue today, I think it would be great for the audience to see, what were the formative forces that brought you and Casilda to feeling that this was an important book to write?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I could start the answer in many different points, but I guess I traveled a lot. When I finished college in 1984, and all I really wanted to do was travel the world and have adventures and see different cultures and meet people with all kinds of different backgrounds. So I was basically an adventurer. I was experimenting with psychedelic drugs. So that was another form of travel and adventure. I saw relationships as an anthropological pursuit. You're with a different woman, you're entering into her world, her personal world, but also her cultural world, right?
Yes.
So that's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to explore, and I had a lot of respect for different perspectives on whatever the issue is. And my ambition was to try to distinguish between what was personal, what was cultural, and what was universally human. And try to, figure out, because I think we confuse so much. We take our personal biases and we assume they're universal, right? We take our cultural biases and assume those are global. Everyone thinks they don't have an accent, right? Everyone else has an accent.
Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of, I'm sure you've read Joseph Campbell, the mythologist.
A lot. I've studied probably all of his books. I have an entire collection of Joseph Campbell. I probably have everything he's ever published, actually.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And people don't know who we're talking about. Check out The Power of Myth, the interviews he did with Bill Moyers. I'm sure they're on YouTube. Fantastic introduction. But anyway, he had a term, detribalization, that I thought was really interesting. So I sought to detribalize myself. I traveled all over the world for 10 years or more, had all sorts of weird jobs, which we could get into if you're interested in that stuff. But I ended up around 33 or so deciding I wanted to go to graduate school. I was tired of teaching English and, growing weed and giving massages and doing whatever I was doing to make a living. And so I went to grad school, and while I was there, I was getting a PhD in psychology, and I picked up a book. I was well into my doctoral research. I was doing something about cancer doctors and very kind of practical, interesting, but ultimately difficult emotionally. And I picked up a book called The Moral Animal by Robert Wright. And it had just come out, 93, 94, somewhere around there. And it was about the new science of evolutionary psychology. It's a fantastic book. It's really well written. Robert Wright, I've had on my podcast a couple of times now, subsequently. But it's a very well written book, very interesting. And it outlines this idea that men and women evolved with differing reproductive strategies and agendas. And so it basically presents this argument that the war between the sexes is eternal because women want to connect with men who are going to be good providers and take care of them and raise the children and invest. Male paternity investment is the scientific term. Whereas men just want to spread their seed everywhere and don't be committed. And so we have these opposing agendas. We're always going to be in conflict. And I thought, man, this explains everything. This is so fascinating. And at the time I was living with my girlfriend was a stripper in San Francisco.
Wow.
And so she had a lot of double-edged sword, like everything, right?
Yeah.
But she was very intelligent and very sort of outspoken. And she hung out with a lot of women. I also worked for a nonprofit at the time called Women in Community Service, all women except for me. So I was surrounded by really intelligent, outspoken women. And I started, spouting all this stuff that I had read in the book. And without exception, these women said, yeah, Chris, that's bullshit, man. That's a Victorian, man's perspective on sexuality. We have sex because it feels good. In fact, it probably feels better for us than it does for you guys. You guys, you come in 7 seconds and it's over. We can come all night. So anyway, they challenged it, and I thought, okay, well, so I went back and I started looking into the research that Wright was using in the book. So I looked into some of the anthropology, I looked into the primatology, I was looking into the anatomy and physiology, and I started finding all sorts of things that he had left out of the argument.
There's his own bias right there.
Right. And I mean, to be fair, it's not just him. He was presenting the mainstream view of human sexual evolution, which goes, back to Darwin, who said that the female is always the reluctant, coy sex, according to his. And I also was looking into Darwin's life more and found that, in fact, Darwin was a virgin until he married at 29, when he married his cousin.
I've studied Darwin's history, yes.
So Darwin was a pretty inhibited dude.
Yeah, and he was a Christian too.
Well, yeah. I mean, that became complicated, obviously, but his wife was very Christian. Darwin's uncle was a libertine poet who had 4 kids with 4 different women, including the maid, and he never hid any of it, and he didn't give a shit who knew, So Darwin was sort of responding to this scandalous family history in a way and overcompensating, as we tend to do generationally. But anyway, I found out about bonobos. Wow, never heard of bonobos. And then, why the fuck haven't I heard of bonobos? They're equally.
Have you studied any of Franz de Waal's work?
Oh, I just 10 minutes ago just ordered his most recent book for my Kindle, which is about gender.
Okay, yeah, because I've studied 2 of his books. I can't remember the titles, but he goes heavy into bonobos and their differences between them and chimps and their sexuality and mirror neurons. His work's very good.
He's fantastic. And I'll tell you, he's also an awesome guy. He's a really good dude. I could tell you a story about him. He helped me when the book was first coming out, even though I was disagreeing with a lot of his narrative.
Can you hook me up with him? I'd love to interview him.
Sure. Yeah, I'll send an email.
Great.
But anyway, so that's what happened. These women challenged this narrative that I had swallowed. I went back and started looking at the actual research, and it was like I was pulling a thread on a tapestry, and the whole tapestry started to come apart. And there I was in graduate school. I was, like I said, I was a year into research on a dissertation, but I realized this is amazing. And the more I read, the more I looked into it, the more I saw how biased and phallocentric this view of human sexual evolution was, how misogynistic it was in many ways, because it denied women agency. It denied that they were motivated by pleasure. It as I said in Sex at Dawn, tongue in cheek, but Darwin says your mother's a whore.
Oh,
right?
Jesus, yeah.
Because Darwin and that view says women only engage in sex for resources. That's the only reason they do it. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother.
Darwin's thrown a monkey wrench into the whole frickin' world. I mean, you look at the knock-on effect of that, it leads right to scientific materialism and a truckload of other problems. And it's just so sad that we've lost touch with Lamarck and some of the other cooperative theories. Could I interject a little comment here?
Please.
What you just talked about Robert Wright's theories and the woman's desire to find a mate that will stay with her to protect the child and be a functional father. And your comments about what the women said, what I've found in my life with a lot of personal experience of engaging in relationships with women is that they seem to have 2 stages that I've identified. Initially, when they're in this open exploration stage, then they are very much like a man. They want to have the joy of sex, and they're not inhibited. If you're with the right women, which I was, But what I found is that deep inside of them, there is a being, a soul that's looking for exactly what Wright was referring to. And I found that as you have more intimacy and deeper connection, there comes a point at which their orientation tends to flip. And now they want to have more isolation of you and more of a classic pair bond for mating and for child raising. I ran into that several times. And I would make statements like, no kids. I'm not leaving my wife. This is my agreement with my wife. This is the ground rules. And for usually about 3 months, it would be real good. But I found that the more intimate and intense the bond was, like the depth of the bond, the more something flipped inside of them, and they thought internally, okay, I've got my man here. He's strong, he's successful, he's a good thinker, whatever their criteria were. And then the orientation often became an attempt to get me to come over to them and isolate myself with them. And almost always conversations about let's have kids together started coming into the thing. So I actually had to disengage from probably at least 6 or 8 relationships that were going well until that depth of penetration reached the point where something inside of them awoken to the fact that, okay, now the situation is different. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in that regard.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot there. I've experienced that as well. I think part of it is cultural, and this is the bulk of what we argued in Sex at Dawn, right? If you live in a world in which women haven't had access to resources except through men for thousands of years, and a world in which women who express their sexual desires openly and, without shame tended to be stoned to death or burned at the stake, or at the very least, expelled from decent society and, left to work as hookers in the street because no one would give them a job, any other job. That, of course, shapes behavior, right? And those are legitimate fears that these women have of being abandoned and so on. And so we live in a society that very much distorts whatever sort of natural behavior there was or there would be, which is why in Sex at Dawn we wanted to go to hunter-gatherer societies and look at, how do women behave when they don't need to worry about getting food. They don't need a man to provide protection and shelter and all these things. And what we found is that in those societies, women's sexual expression is much freer. And if you look at primates in general, there is no group living social primate, no species of group living primate that's sexually monogamous. None of them, except us, if you believe the mainstream narrative, right? So, so I think that's a big thing. Now, beyond that, I do think that there is an impulse in all of us to feel possessive of something that becomes precious to us.
Yes, I agree.
So, if you're with a woman and she's feeling, at the beginning, it's easy. You're just another dude and you're telling your story and everything's fine and it's no big deal. But as you say, you get to a certain point and she or he, if the roles are reversed, can start to think, well, I would be so much happier if this guy was around all the time. And this would solve a lot of my problems. And I'm lonely, Yeah, he and I spend a weekend together, then he goes home to his wife and I'm sitting here with my cat. So I think there are situational reasons for that have nothing to do with the arguments we made in Sex at Dawn. So although, it is interesting, like, you in your email to me, you explained how you've got an unconventional family structure. So you also, we also have to think, like, how would it work if there were room for people? I've been in relationships with women when I was married, where the woman said, look, I've got no problem with you being married. I love your wife. I'm totally cool. But is there space for me here? Because, in the conventional world, there isn't. It's your nuclear family and everyone else is out. But there are ways around that. And I think people are starting to get more flexible, largely thanks to people like you who are like unashamed and open about what you're doing. And they see that can actually work, because I've heard from so many therapists who say to me, open relationships don't work. I know because I get so many of patients who come in complaining about jealousy and, so on and so forth. And I say, of course, the ones that are working aren't going to a therapist,
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to share some big news with you today. This month, anyone with an internet connection will be able to learn my holistic system of exercise and conditioning. That's because we're finally putting one of my most important advanced training programs out to the digital world. That's Integrated Movement Science Level 1, which is now available online. IMS1 includes my physiological load assessment, postural assessments, stretching and mobility assessments, how to perform corrective mobilizations, instructions on improving stability, and a huge library of exercises, all of which are game changers for any practice. The physiological load assessment alone makes a huge difference in your client results and keeps them from getting injured and progressing more naturally and fully, which results in excellent walk-around marketing for you. Whether you're just getting started in holistic health and performance, or you're looking to upskill, or you just want to stand out from the crowd, IMS1 is the advanced training you need. To get early notification of the course release and win a 10% discount at the launch, please go to the Chek Shop, that's CHEK shop, thechekshop.com/IMS1 online. That's thechekshop.com/IMS1 online and sign up. I know you're going to love this program. I've got nothing but excellent feedback for the years I've been running it live, and it's super exciting to be able to share it with you online so you can learn at your own pace anytime, anywhere you have an internet connection. Enjoy. There's some interesting things I'll share with you from my own experience. I really love and appreciate Penny. I was married for 17 years to my first wife. We were together from the time we were 16. When I just turned 18, my first son was born. He's 42 now. He's got his own child now. And I found both of us struggled with monogamy. And my mother was a Christian Scientist until I was 8. And then she became until I was 12. She became a yogi when I was 12 and joined the Self-Realization Fellowship. So my early childhood imprint was Christian Science, which is really quite a intense version of Christianity, very, shall we say, Victorian values and things like that. So I had this childhood imprint in me. And I found myself constantly uncomfortable as an athlete and a therapist and a lecturer. I had many opportunities where women expressed their willingness to engage me, but I had this, agreement with my wife that we would not do that. And she was, my first wife's extremely beautiful. She was a Olympic class volleyball player and just a beautiful, stunningly good looking athlete, And so she too had to fight this. And there was plenty of men that wanted to, have a go. But we managed to stay monogamous till the very end. And then that's when the whole relationship started breaking down. And it wasn't because of the sex thing. It was just because we had been together since we were young and we needed different things and our orientation was different. And so through the challenges that I experienced, I realized that I have to be honest with myself in relationship. I cannot enter a relationship when on the inside, I know I'm always hungry for novelty and new experiences and beautiful women. And I love smart, intelligent, powerful women. And the two that I'm married to are very, very smart and intelligent. You just met Penny, and Penny's like super, super smart. She's got 3 master's degrees and she's a pilot and she's just really good at a lot of stuff. And so what I found is when I met Penny and we both knew that we were going to be together and get married. Actually, we only knew each other for 5 days and we got engaged. We both just knew. And I said to her right up front, I just explained what I'd been through for 17 years and said, I don't ever want to be in a position where I feel leveraged to have to cheat on you or lie on you or do anything behind your back, because I can't deal with the pain of that. I have to, because of my work as a therapist, I have to be completely congruent with myself, because I do a lot of spiritual work with people, connecting to their souls and figuring out why they have diseases. And I found anytime I have shadow baggage, it stops my ability to be a clean vessel. Right. So I really have always committed myself to being a clean medium, so that when I'm working in spiritual realms, I don't have lenses of filtration that stop me from seeing what I may not want to see, because I have unhealed trauma or judgments or baggage within myself. And so I shared with Penny, I said, I love you. And just because I have sex with someone else doesn't mean that I'm in love with them or that I want to leave you. And she looked at me and smiled and she said, well, I'm European, and don't forget, I was in a relationship when you and I met and were making love, and I had to fly home and tell a guy that I had gotten engaged. So our agreement was just to be honest with each other. And our kind of own marriage contract was, as long as we love each other and we're willing to work through our challenges together, we stay together, but let's not drag each other down the rocky road just because of some marriage contract if we aren't if we're not in that place of commitment together. And so that's how we engaged each other. And Penny said, look, you can have 7 wives if you want, but here's my rule: they have to cook, clean, contribute to the bottom line, and they can't talk too much, because I don't enjoy women that just talk their heads off. They have to be productive and be part of the team, or I don't want them around.
Yeah.
And I could never find 7 women. I ultimately found one more, which became Angie. And so why I'm sharing this is because, I've been a therapist for 38 years and I've counseled countless elite athletes. In fact, I've had athletes that carry 4 phones, each with a different woman's number attached to it, all kept secret from each other, all of whom think they're going to get married to this guy. And all of them were raised Christian, and all of them were married with kids at home and trying to compartmentalize their life. And every one of them came to me because of chronic intractable pain that nobody could figure out. And I tracked it right to these issues. And they all knew that I had a multiple partner relationship and came to me specifically to ask me how to cheat better. And all of them were shocked when I said, no, you cannot do that. You're living an immoral, unethical life, and you are going to damage your family. You're going to damage your children, and you're going to damage yourself. And the reason that you're here is because you're already doing it. So I said, look, you need to come clean. And I tell them, to thine own self be true, or thou canst be true to any other man. You cannot be true in relationship. And you're actually never present with any one of those women, because you're compartmentalizing your life by at least 4 different relationships. So the analogy I give is, if I'm having a relationship with you, like I'm talking to you right now, if I'm 10% not here because I'm worried about someone else finding about my conversation with Chris, there's 10% of me that Chris can't access. Right. So that makes a 20% deficit in the relationship. So the analogy I gave them is, you're doing this with 4 or 5 women. So you multiply that 10% as an analogy times 5, that's 50%, means you can never be present with anybody, because you're juggling so many masks that you have to worry about whether you get stoned or drink too much alcohol and let the cat out of the bag and leave booby traps everywhere for yourself. And so what that ultimately led to for me was engaging these things. But what happened is as I began getting intimate with, very beautiful, very intelligent women, I could feel my Christian programming coming up. In fact, there was a couple of times that the women helped me through it because they would feel something was wrong, like I wasn't connecting deeply. And I would say, I'm really having a hard time moving past some of this Christian programming. And I said, intellectually, I have no interest in it. But now that I'm here making love to you and I'm having such an intense experience, something inside of me feels like I'm cheating on Penny, and I don't want to do that. So I was being completely honest. But my point is, you see how those roots are quite deep, that imprint. And even though that was only the first 8 years of my life, and intellectually and at a conscious ego level, I knew I didn't want to be monogamous. But as I got deeper into some of these relationships, it brought all that programming up. And it took me quite a while to heal it. I had to do several medicine ceremonies, work with my soul, connect deeply, go into my unconscious, and really confront what it was in there that was causing me to have these unconscious upheavals that were shocking even to me. And then there were situations where I found myself so enwrapped by a woman that I even found myself thinking, well, maybe I really belong with this one. Maybe that's where I'm supposed to be. But then I would God, Penny's the woman of my dreams. I love every bit of her, and there's no way. So you see, there would be this internal struggle. And so I found that, interestingly, and I've come across this in a lot of people in these types of experiences, that there is actually, maybe it's cultural, I don't know, but there is actually, when you get deep enough into connection and penetration, that this monogamous urge starts to rise up. And I found myself constantly having this internal challenge with my ideology and my way of living. And it took me a number of years to work through that and learn how to manage myself in a multiple partner relationship so that I didn't find myself in these situations where the love and the beauty was so intense that all of a sudden this monogamous urge came up, or all of a sudden I was feeling guilty or shameful. And I never kept anything from Penny, ever. She always knew who I was with. It was always clean. But I just wanted to share this with you because with your background and your experience, I think you're one of the few people in the world I could talk to about this that would understand this. And I think part of the reason I want to share this with you is because there's a countless number of people have come to me, including students. I have about 60,000 students that have gone through some level of my training programs worldwide. So I have a lot of exposure to people. And many of my young students, men and women, say, oh, I want to live like you're living. I want to have multiple partners and things like that. And I always tell them, I said, look, I'm going to tell you what I've learned about multiple partner relationships. It's very simple, but not simple. And here's your lesson from Paul. Until you can ride one horse really well, it's very dangerous to try to ride two.
Especially if they're going in different directions.
Yes, you will get split in half, and I've watched it happen many times. Yeah. So I bring these things up onto the table with you in particular because I think it's very important for listeners, because there's a lot of young people, especially between 19 and 40, maybe 45, that really have all this Christian baggage, have the pain of the Christian baggage, have had the pain of cheating in relationships, but now have come to this conclusion, multiple partners is cool. I get lots of sex, but they have no idea what they're stepping into. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm sorry that was such a long rattle, but I think it's such an important truth,
Well, I mean, you touched on so many interesting things there. Just at the end there, I think you touched on the fact that sex isn't intimacy. I think of sex and love, or sex and intimacy, as like wine and cheese, right? They go together really well. Yeah. And each one can be good on its own. But the problem is that people think, oh, I can have multiple relationships that I'll have more intimacy. But often multiple relationships can be a way of
More
avoiding intimacy.
complexity. Yes. And I have a comment in our notes for that too.
Yeah. So I think that, your central point, as I heard it, is that true intimacy is about authenticity and transparency and honesty. Whether that's with one person or two people or three people, that's another question. But it's not about juggling people. It's not the guy with 4 phones in his pocket, one for each woman. He's lying to everyone. There's no intimacy in his life. He's a sad and lonely man.
That's a very good point. I really appreciate you bringing that up, Chris, because that is bullseye. And it really is the depth of the truth of it all. And even Penny said to me when we first had our first conversation 25 years ago, she said, sex isn't love. I know you love me and I trust you and I love her. And, our relationship agreement was, I said, honey, if you want to have sex with someone and you need to keep that secret because it just makes you feel safer, I said, just do me a favor. Don't get in bed with someone and feel insecure like you're worried about me finding out, because it'll just be shitty sex. I'd rather you just have a good time. And if you want to tell me about it, great. If you don't, and that brings up another point. One of the things I see, particularly with immature men and sometimes immature women, is that when they're with another partner, they start prying and prying and prying, and they want to know every secret, everything, who they've had sex with. And then often it gets used against them as leverage. I've seen it happen over and over again. So I tell people in therapy, look, everybody needs a treasure chest. We all have experiences that were so special, so unique, and oftentimes even exotic. Like, you don't always want to tell everybody that you made love to the maid on the washing machine and had this intimate orgasmic experience, because 99% of the time, anyone that finds that out is going to hold it against you at some point in your life. And they might be your friend today, but as soon as they can use that as leverage against you, it's going to be dangerous. So I believe everyone needs their own treasure chest,
Especially women. Let's be honest, right? Like,
Mhm.
you and I made love with the maid on the washing machine. We're studs, but the woman who did it is potentially going to be shamed much more than we would. Well, what you're describing, I often think of it as a form of emotional obesity, where there's a lot of quantity, but very little quality, like nutritional quality. They're just empty calories. So and I know these guys too, with the phones and the lies and the deceptions and all that. And they, similar to your experience, I get guys who come to me, mostly guys who come to me and think that sex at dawn gives them an excuse to cheat.
Yes, that's exactly what I experienced. And I think, unfortunately, look, I've studied world religion extensively. I've studied psychology, depth psychology, and Carl Jung is somebody who I've got his collected works. I've studied it for 25 plus years, and Jung himself had 2 wives for a long time. And I've read all about those wives and those relationships, and a entire book about his actual first wife, about Angela. I think it was, what was her name? I forgot her name, but the woman that became a second wife to him for many years. And I've read all the Jungian critiques on it. And, he stirred up a shitstorm for sure. But from what I understand, he had the same philosophy as I did, just live true. And you can't control other people's thinking. And imagine doing that in 1920 when he was doing it. That would have been a shitstorm. But the point that I'm driving at is that Christian programming is so heavy and so confining and so laden with guilt, shame, and punishment and sin, that what I see happening in most males is they're trying to figure out how to work around God. How do you be a Christian when you're with your family and you're with your Christian friends and you're at church, but then deal with the man in you, the silverback gorilla in you, and a lot of professional athletes have women just throwing them at them. I mean, I used to be a consultant for many of the top rugby teams in the world. And I was once called into Auckland, New Zealand to do some work with, I think it was either the All Blacks or the Auckland Blues. I can't remember. But I happened to get there at night after they'd finished a rugby game. And the strength coach for the team's one of my top students. And he took me up to his room, and we got out of the elevator. And as the door opened, I'm watching naked girls, or like in their G-strings, open the door thinking no one's there and running to the next room. And I saw this happen like 5 times. And I said to my buddy, I said, "What is going on?" He said, "Oh, those girls have just had sex with one of the players. Now they're going to the next guy's room." And I said, "Is this common?" He says, "Oh, everywhere we go." And a lot of these women were married too. And so they're doing all this. But my point is, you see, what happens is the cultural imprint, the religious imprint is so strong that these guys have to figure out, how do they compartmentalize God, Jesus, hell and damnation and sin, and not completely destroy their relationship at home and still be the man that they really are. And that really just stirs up a shitstorm psychologically for people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how, negotiating that conflict that you're talking about between dealing with the cultural requirements and the family requirements and all that, and the sort of biological libido-based voices in us. Negotiating that is one of the most important and difficult things that we're going to do in our lives, but nobody teaches you how to do it. No. It's like if we taught kids about sex and relationships, or if we taught them about driving the way we teach them about sex and relationships, it would be, "Oh, you're 16, here are the keys, go figure it out and try not to wreck the car." or kill anybody,
And that doesn't even work with driver's education these days.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about athletes. I won't name any names, but I know some athletes, some big famous athletes, and also very wealthy people and actors and all these people. And it's amazing how particularly men can be so intelligent about negotiating a business deal and, never sign a contract without lawyers looking at it. And, they're so good at all those things. They live on yachts and they've got multi-million-dollar corporations, but wave a sexy woman in front of them and they can't think 2 steps ahead.
And down comes the glass house.
I mean,
my God.
When Tiger Woods, when that whole thing came down with Tiger Woods, I was just like, will someone please introduce me to Tiger Woods? Because if I could sit with him for a couple of hours and just grab him by the fucking collar and shake some sense into him, dude, you do not need to lie. You've got thousands of women in the world who would be very happy to be Mrs. Tiger Woods and be totally down with whatever the fuck you want to do when you're in Vegas. And they'd probably be happy to do it with you. I mean, you do not need to do this. You don't need to lose your dignity, to have what you want. And I think that's, we're talking about personal experience. What you were talking about earlier, where you sort of have this moment of this pivot point in relationships where the woman wants to pull you into a more monogamous situation. I found, interestingly, recently, that women I know, let's say under 35, are much more interested in relationships that involve other women.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's a lot of that going on.
And I think that's a cultural shift. I don't know how old you are. I'm 60. I just turned 60. And, when I was in my 20s or teens, there were no girls kissing each other in bars or TV. That wasn't a thing.
I'm 60 as well, by the way.
Oh, all right. So we're the same. So, I mean, it's a change that happened when we were already in our 30s and into our 40s. But now those girls have become women. And I think there's a whole different thing going on with them where that kind of possessiveness isn't necessarily as built into them culturally as, what you and I remember.
Yeah, well, I've talked to many about this because I've observed the same phenomenon. And I've actually helped women that wanted to have sex with a woman find a woman because they couldn't find one and it was driving them crazy. I mean, I've had some of them like really emotionally distraught because this urge to be intimate with a woman was so strong, but they didn't feel safe to tell anybody about it. And oftentimes it comes up in therapy. For example, they will be coming to me with things like chronic SI joint disorder or pelvic floor problems or coccyx pain. And using my spiritual abilities, I tap in and see what's going on. And I feel that there's a holding pattern down there. And what I've found talking to them, and this has been many cases, at least a dozen, I said, well, what is it that makes you hungry for intimacy with a woman? And in every single case, it was women that did not feel sexually satisfied in relationships with men. They almost always said, it starts off good, but then the next thing you know, he just wants to roll over and go to sleep. And there's no pleasure for me. It's just wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. I'm done, gone. And so they've all felt like they need a woman that knows how to connect to a woman and pleasure a woman and nurture a woman. And so they're so frustrated with this, shall we say, masculine imbalance or lack of vitality or sustainability or interest in the woman, because men can lose interest in, there's an old saying, not 10 feet from every beautiful woman is a man tired of having sex with her. And so I think women get kind of rubbed wrong with all that, and so they want somebody to really just look into their eyes and fondle and take 2 or 3 hours and really make them be present with them. Yeah. That's the common theme that I saw, and that's what I think's driving all this. And I think, as you're surely aware, we're both 60, so I've watched the health and vitality of men get lower and lower and lower and lower to the point where I've got 19-year-old athletes getting a hold of me asking how to get off of Viagra. I'm like, shit, you're a 19-year-old. When I was 19, I could use my dick as a dinner bell, for Christ's sakes. I said, this is serious stuff. You're already an old man.
So do you think that's psychological primarily, or do you think it's estrogenic compounds in the food supply? Because, sperm count's been dropping rapidly in the last 40 years as well.
Yes. Yeah, it has. I've actually seen the research on that. In 1938, the average male was ejaculating about 2 million sperms. And by about it's been years since I read it, but by about 1970, they were down to as low as 69,000 sperms per ejaculation, which isn't enough to do anything. And the research I looked at showed that if a man ate 25% of his diet as certified organic food, that it would cause a significant jump. If he ate 50% of his diet as organic food, it brought him up to about, I think it was over 1 million. And then with 100% organic diet, most of them were back up to around 2 million sperms per ejaculation. And this research, was pretty old. So they'd already recognized this problem a long time ago. So I think it's a combination of factors. I think that one, men aren't getting nearly the kind of connection to their mothers and learning about a woman from their mother, because we've got so many working women now that they're being babysat by Game Boys and televisions, and they're not really developing their mother archetype very effectively. So they're kind of detached from the depth of what a woman is. Then you got the health things. Then you've got the high levels of estrogens and plastics in foods. So I think it's a combination factor, really. Symbiotica makes an amazing product called Liposomal B12. I love it. It tastes great. It's very effective. But I am not the technical engineer behind the genius of the product, and the man that is sitting right here. So, Shervin, tell us what is unique about Liposomal B12 and why should people consider using it?
Well, I'd like to call it a much longer name, but in the
I'm sure you could.
but at the scope of having to label something, it's called liposomal B12. But in actuality, it's liposomal methylcobalamin and liposomal adenosylcobalamin, which are two forms of B12 that are readily usable by the body in terms of cellular energy and methylation. We also have L-methylfolate in there and vitamin B6 pyridoxine in combination with fulvic minerals, which actually push the vitamins to do their job. And, a lot of people talk about B12 being an energy producer,
Right.
but it's not a stimulant. What it does is it cleans up the cell, allows the cell to properly methylate, which means cleansing the cell, which ultimately, when you cleanse the cell, you get more energy. So this formula, it being in liposomal form, is probably all of my top athletes' favorite product. And I use it every single day. And another thing that just really quick jump on is we have this whole thing with MTHFR gene mutation.
Yeah.
That's a big thing that everyone now is getting tested on. A lot of children are considered to be on the spectrum when the whole time they weren't properly methylating.
Right.
This is, fuel for that fire of the methylation process. That's specifically what this product is. This is a methylator.
Which means what to the layman?
Which means that it allows the body to recognize which cells need to be cleansed, which cells need to have programmed death, apoptosis, helps the body go into autophagy. All of the things regarding macrophages and cellular cleanup and all that stuff, you need this nutrient in these forms to have a very cohesive system.
And today we need clean cells, and it actually works very fast as well. I mean, when I squirt it in my mouth, I can feel it happening quickly.
It's almost immediately, and just like any other Symbiotica product, there's no additives, there's no fillers. We've really upgraded the original product to where we're at today. And if you're listening to this, you're going to be getting the new version of this, which is just through the roof. It tastes delicious. It's awesome. It's in our Myron glass bottle, so it's blocked from ultraviolet light. This stuff is, it's the best ever.
Yeah, awesome. So if you want to get the world's greatest liposomal B12, go to symbiotica.com, CYMBIOTIKA.com, and use the code CHEK15 on checkout. You won't be disappointed. I was going to mention this later, but I'll give you an example of how radically off the Western culture is. I studied a great book. Have you ever heard of the book Voices of the First Day by Robert Lawler?
No.
Oh my God. For a guy that's into what you're into, it's a phenomenal book. Robert Lawler is an incredible writer and a very deep philosopher. But the Voices of the First Day is the study of the Aboriginal culture, and it includes a comprehensive section on how they taught and practiced sexual intimacy.
Huh.
And what Lawler identifies is that in most Aboriginal tribes, they had a hut in the middle of the tribe. None of the men were allowed to get married until all the women in the tribe deemed him worthy of being a husband. So the way they did it is most men didn't reach qualification for marriage till about 38 to 40 years of age. And in the meantime, all the young men are encouraged to have sex with any of the married women they want to. And so through their entire youth, they're having sex with married women. And they found that if a man and a woman had sexual intimacy or slept together longer than 3 days, that it caused a strong pair bonding effect and disrupted the actual marriage that the woman had. So they made sure nobody was able to sleep with the same woman or partner more than 3 nights in a row. And what they did with the children was amazing. Every night they would sit around the campfire, and the kids, any children that caught somebody having sex would spy on them, but they would keep it secret. And then they would get in front of the adults around the fire and they would imitate who they saw having sex. And if the elders could guess who it was, then the kids were rewarded because they had learned something by watching carefully. So what happened is the women specifically were teaching the young men how to pleasure a woman, how to be good in bed, how to be a good partner. And only when every woman in the tribe gave him the green light was he allowed to be married. Now, to me, that's really good. And what I learned from that, because I found in my own intimate relationships, when I all of a sudden started feeling this urge to monogamy, that was like something scared me, because the last thing I wanted to do is make Penny suffer the pain of her being so gracious and loving to let me be myself. So what I realized is that when it got to the point where I met Angie, in a long story made short, Angie's a very powerful woman, a shaman, many degrees. And it was just, the universe brought me a woman that was so powerful. I'm like, why do I want to keep having sex with other women? I mean, I've got everything I want in these two women. And to keep shopping when you've already got enough is just foolish. And her and Penny get along very well. They're both highly intelligent. They respect each other. In fact, in 10 years, they've never had a fight. They've always worked together. They're mission oriented. So I realized, because with Angie, there would be times I'd stay with her for more than 3 days, and I felt exactly what the Aboriginals said, is like I didn't want to go home. And so once we moved together and did our own marriage ceremony, I set it up so that I sleep with Penny for 2 nights, and then I sleep with Angie for 2 nights, because I found that if I don't do that, I myself find this unconscious desire. And one of the most dangerous things you can do when you have multiple partners or 2 wives like that is for one of them to feel like you're paying more attention to the other one. That's when the shitstorm begins. And so it takes a lot of real honest focus and real concerted awareness of, okay, am I being equal in how I love these women and support these women? And I think that the Aboriginal culture was the first culture I'd studied that actually figured it out, and that it was not more than 72 hours, or that whole problem of monogamous bonding starts, and then you're unable to maintain that balance in the relationship. And that was a real lesson for me. And I can say I'm pretty proud, because I figured it out through my study and through my awareness and through my practice. And we've been together 10 years now, and it's unbelievable. None of us could ever go back.
Yeah, it's admirable that you've figured it out. It's like reinventing the wheel, unfortunately.
Yes.
As you say, other societies have this all worked out. Still, African societies that I studied, still have this sort of thing well worked out, where the women have their own huts, and the man will spend one night in each hut, and never more than one, or I don't know if it's 2, but very scrupulous about resources and time and attention and affection being very evenly divided. And also, another thing that you sort of echoed earlier is there's a distinction between the first wife and the second wife. The first wife has the right of approval or rejection. So when the man brings a woman and says, I want to marry her, the first wife can say no. And one of the things that she's looking at is, will this woman work? Will she take care of kids? Will she, I don't want a freeloader. I want a woman who's going to help me. It's interesting how getting back to where we started, that whole difference between what's personal and cultural and universal. Something like jealousy, because we all feel it, we assume that it's universal. And maybe the feeling of, I don't want to lose something that's precious to me, that's universal. But how that expresses as, therefore, I need to control someone else's emotional and sexual life, that's cultural. So it's interesting. To me, this stuff fits into, what I said earlier about traveling and psychedelics and any kind of exploration and questioning of consensus reality. That's what turns me on intellectually and sexually. I mean, it's just like, I want to ask the fucking question. I don't care how improper it sounds.
You know what? I personally, I don't like trusting other people's opinion as fact. If it's something that I can actually legitimately look into. Now, if I'm reading a study on quantum biology, well, I don't have a $2 million lab nor the training to repeat those studies. So I just look to see if there's common sense and does the dots line up, and do I get a sense of truth in me, and can I see how it applies in the real world? So in a situation like that, I have to go with a consensus of experts and just what seems common sense to me. But when it comes to questions like, will God burn you in hell for masturbating, or will God burn you in hell because you have multiple partners? Well, I have to go talk to God about that. I'm sure as hell not going to talk to people that are caught in the same disease that I'm trying to heal. Yeah. And so you have to be a pioneer. So there's a real, as you know, there's a real risk, because whenever you enter the non-consensus, you set yourself up for attack and, being stoned in the right era. And fortunately, I've always had a bit of a pioneering, rebellious spirit where I tell people opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one, but not many of them smell that good. So I have to trust my own opinions first, or I'll never know what's true or not. And I think that's the only way we can really learn and grow. And I'm really grateful, because once you have your own authentic experience, like I could be sharing some of these things with you and you could completely disagree with me, and I would be fine with that, but I would just have to say, Chris, that's my experience, right? It'd be like you saying, I hate chocolate cake and I think everyone should eat it, kind of thing, Could you explain the differences for the listeners between monogamy, polyamory, and polygamy, just so that they have a context for those?
Sure. The first thing I would want to distinguish is between emotional monogamy and sexual monogamy, because there's a lot of confusion around this when scientists refer to so-called monogamous species that are generally birds, because you see the male and the female bird tending the nest together. They're cooperating. One of them's protecting the fledglings while the other's off, catching fish or whatever. And swans, for example, they say, oh, well, swans are monogamous because we have a male and a female in the babies. Turns out that once DNA testing became cheap enough that students could start testing the feathers that are left in the nest by the male and the female against the feathers of the babies, they find that in many cases, the male social father of those babies is not the biological father.
Right. Interesting.
So many of the species that people will tell you are monogamous actually are only, emotionally or socially monogamous, but not sexually.
Right. It's kind of like people that say you should be a vegetarian because gorillas are vegetarians and look how much muscle they have. And I say, yes, but you forgot one thing. Gorillas have enzymes for breaking cellulose down that human beings don't have. Yeah. So if you can eat a bowl full of fiber and maintain muscle mass, then hallelujah. But the rest of you are going to get sick and become my patients because of that kind of, point being is when you get these ideological belief systems that are not evaluated and investigated, then you get beliefs that turn out to be problematic to one's own health and well-being. And I think psychologically and socially, what you're bringing up is very important, because I've seen that exact argument used by many people arguing for the fact that we are monogamous by nature and should always be that way. And then it's picked up by religious people who use, look, here's an example of this bird, they blah, blah, and then they go off on their whole thing. But that's just unchecked. You know what that is cherry picking to suit your program bias.
Right. And they're picking very distant cherries, right? Like
Yes.
Penguins, like the March of the Penguins was a big thing. I did a little riff on that in Sex at Dawn. So, the March of the Penguins was this movie. It's about how the male and the female protect the young and the storms and the cold winds of Antarctica and blah, 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 blah. And I mean, churches across America were renting cinemas to show this film to their congregations. The whole thing was this great celebration of monogamy and Jesus was right and blah, blah, blah. So I looked into it, and they're emperor penguins is the species that's in that film. And it turns out that emperor penguins live about 35 years. They reach sexual maturity at about 15 or so. And from that point on, they're monogamous for each breeding cycle. So they're only monogamous with their partner for 1 year. And then next year, it's a different one. So they've got 15 or 20 sexual partners in their lives.
Right. Yeah, but we can't tell that in church.
So, it's cherry picking in terms of the species being used as examples and also the aspect of that species behavior that's being discussed. So it's if you look at, as I said earlier, what's the most relevant species for us to look at? It's social primates, right? That's what we are. We're a highly social primate. There are no social primates that are sexually monogamous. Zero. So that's inconvenient. So let's look at birds, So anyway, the difference so monogamy is having one acknowledged sexual partner when we're talking about sexual monogamy. Often, though, it refers to one marriage partner. So in historical references to monogamy, it refers to the woman having one husband. It does not refer to the man's sexual behavior. So according to that definition, which is the most common definition of monogamy used until the last 30 or 40 years, as long as the woman is only having sex with her husband, it doesn't matter what the husband's doing. He could be boning the maid, he could be seeing prostitutes, he could have a concubine. That's considered a monogamous relationship because the woman is only having sex with him. So there's great hypocrisy built into that.
Yes, and that's classically Christian behavior. I mean, if you go back to early Christianity and see how they set it up, the man had complete control of his woman, but he could tell that woman she had to have sex with his workers or anybody he wanted to. And if she had sex with anybody else, she could get stoned to death, gutted, killed, tortured. I mean, you start looking
and that's
into
still the
this
case
shit,
now, right? In Afghanistan, Pakistan, many societies, if a woman is raped, she's considered useless.
A whore.
Yeah,
they're dirty.
she has no value. Yeah,
they might even kill her.
Right.
It's this what we're talking about is such a dangerous disease to the sustainability of culture because it leads to so much psychological trauma for the women in particular. I mean, I tell people all the time, if you study Christianity and how it treats women, it's a shock to me that any woman would ever be a Christian because you're stepping right into a historical melting pot that is very, very destructive and denigrating to females right from the very beginning of the whole Adam and Eve story.
Yeah. Do you know the history of the term Vestal Virgin or of that concept?
I don't recall the particulars. I might once you start talking about
What's quite interesting, it's the first use of the term virgin that's come down to us. And it did not mean a woman who doesn't have sex. It meant a woman who was untouched by men. In other words, a woman who was not part of the world of marriage and family and all that. So sacred prostitutes, which were plentiful in ancient Greece and Rome, were considered virgins because they were unmarried. So these terms are packed with all sorts of assumptions and meanings and hypocrisies. So as that preamble, monogamy refers to the marriage of one couple with one other person. I'm saying person because now we have gay marriage, and I guess a gay monogamous relationship would be sexually just those two men or two women with each other, although, there are interesting permutations there. Gay men, for example, tend to understand the difference between sexual and social monogamy instinctively. So that's an interesting thing. Polygamy, there's confusion around that because polygamy normally is used as one man, several women. But the correct term there is polygyny, G-Y-N, meaning like gynecological, right? Referring to multiple females, but one male. So gorillas that you mentioned earlier, they're a polygynous harem-based mating system where you have one alpha male and he has several females that only he can have sex with. Which results in some interesting issues in terms of the evolution of the genitals in gorillas versus other species. It turns out that when only one male is having sex with the females, evolution favors the development of big muscles, weapons like fangs and horns or whatever's used in that particular animal to beat the other males so that he can have sex with the females. But it often results in shrinkage of genitalia. So a gorilla's penis is the size of your pinky finger, fully erect, because there's no sperm competition happening. Once you win the fight, there's no more competition. Whereas with bonobos or chimps, or I've argued humans, there's more evolutionary pressure on the genitalia because there is sperm competition happening. So that's a whole other thing. And then polyamory refers to several different ongoing loving situations. So actual intimacy, not just sex happening.
Hi, everybody. Have you ever wondered why your blood is red? It's because it's full of oxygen and life force. It's what keeps you going. But what if I could tell you about something else that's red that will add more life force and keep you going? And if you start with a red juice before you have coffee or tea and wait a few minutes, you might find that you either don't need the coffee or the tea, or you need less of it. But this time, instead of getting coffee and tea, you got a lot of nutrition and a lot of great stuff for stress management and detoxification. And it's so important. I got Drew Canoli. It took me 2 years to get him to come hang out with me and talk about this. I said, Drew, tell me more about your red juice. And he is right here to tell us what is on with your red juice. My kids love it. Everybody I know loves it.
Well, I love that we have it for kids. Because
Yes.
when I was a kid, there was this big red dude that would burst through a brick wall. And he was like, oh, yeah. And he would feed me a glass of 50 grams of sugar, giving most people diabetes,
Yeah.
ADHD,
Yeah.
addiction,
Obesity.
all the things, right? So when we created Red, it was, what's the alternative?
Mm-hmm.
If we could create something that could create lasting stamina, lasting energy, and then we started to look at our ancient ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the Vikings, the
Mhm.
people that were rowing across the oceans for days
Yeah.
to go to war.
Yeah.
What were they taking? Well, they were taking rhodiola.
Yeah.
Rhodiola is in our red juice.
Yeah.
And then we were like, okay, so out of all the mushrooms,
Yeah.
what's one of the best medicinal mushrooms that can give us long-lasting energy?
Mm.
We found cordyceps. Cordyceps are absolutely amazing.
Yes.
Not just any cordyceps or rhodiola, glyphosate residue-free and organic.
Mhm.
And how can we make it taste better than the, oh yeah, you know, how do we make it taste better than that without the sugar?
Yeah.
We added a little monk fruit.
Monk
And we-
fruit's amazing.
Yep, and we found the best berries on the planet.
Mm.
Berries in high amounts, which we have in the red juice, actually help increase stem cell creation in your body.
Mm.
What's better than that for our little ones and for us?
Yes.
And so many people are just lethargic. They're lacking energy.
Yes.
What could we do for that? Red juice in the afternoon, 2 p.m. rolls around, instead of a nap, instead of the coffee, drink the red juice. You're going to feel so much better.
Well, if you need the nap, take the nap if you can, but then take the red juice to kick you back into gear.
Exactly. I love naps and I love coffee.
I do too, but I love to make sure I got the nutrition in me first. You know, the other thing is berries are a natural stimulant to the adrenal glands. So
Mm.
if people would do a little red juice before they do coffee and tea, they would pick themselves up naturally, except this time they're bringing in nutrition. And unfortunately, coffee blocks almost every vitamin and mineral you can put in your mouth. So, hey, there you have it, right from the man himself. If you're ready to get red with life force energy and vitality, go to Organifi.com. That's Organifi.com. And to make it even better, use the code CHEK20, all caps, to get your 20% discount on checkout, because you're a living 4D badass and we want you healthy. I love you. Bye-bye. So the polygamy, I was always under the understanding that it was multiple marriages. But if I heard you right, you don't have to be married to be in a polygamous relationship.
Well, no, particularly not when you're talking about other species, right? Okay. So a lot of people would refer to gorillas as a polygamous species. So
because I know the Mormons are referred to as polygamous.
Yeah. Yeah, it generally refers to one male, multiple females. And it's assumed that the females are monogamous with that one male. But again, definitions of these things are very slippery because they change, in terms of culture, in terms of species, over time, and some people in their own lives would have their own definitions. The term I like is ethical non-monogamy. I think that sort of encompasses all different alternatives to the sort of standard, lie-based monogamous. And again, I'm not saying all monogamy is lie-based. My parents were monogamously married for 50 some years, and they were very happy. So I never want to be misinterpreted to be implying that everyone who's monogamous is full of shit and, cheating behind their partner's back. That's not always the case. And actually, Sex at Dawn doesn't argue in favor of any particular approach to, forming a relationship other than authenticity. And
amen to that. That's one of the things I loved about it, because even by the time I got a hold of your book, I had plenty of experience. So I'm reading the book as a guy who's lived this path, not somebody who's reading it like, oh my God, I can't believe he's saying this stuff, but has no experience. And interestingly, too, when I talked to a lot of people about your book that had negative reactions to it, the first question I had from almost all of them were in monogamous so-called relationships. I looked them right in the eyes and I say, have you ever cheated on your spouse? Almost all of them had. Yeah. I said, okay, so here's what you're doing. You're playing a very, very dangerous game, because what you're doing is you're giving me a monogamous argument, but you are not living that truth, but you're now criticizing this author in this book for very good research, very honest research, and making a proposal that we should all seriously consider, because it shines a light on our own, shall we say, shadow. And you're not, instead of looking at your shadow, you're just projecting onto the book or onto the author. But in reality, you're actually evidence that he's correct.
Yeah, I get that a lot. And, I don't ask people if they've cheated on their spouse, at least not when I'm giving a public talk or something. But what I will ask them is, particularly men, do you watch porn?
Yeah, that's a big one.
And everyone says yes. And I say, well, do you watch the same actress over and over again?
No.
So whether you live it or not doesn't really matter in terms of this discussion. We're talking about what impulses we have. And if your impulse is to watch porn and to watch a different woman every time, then clearly you're attracted to sexual novelty.
Yes, and I can tell you from a lot of clinical experience that women who find out that their husband is watching porn behind their back have almost an identical reaction to if he was cheating and having sex with somebody else. It has the same negative impact on them. I've had women call me up and say, would you counsel my husband? This is what's going on. I'm like, well, if your husband wants help, yes, but I'm certainly not going to do it because he's being leveraged by you. But my point is, I can tell you as sure as I'm Paul Chek sitting here talking to you, that you might as well have screwed your neighbor or your maid or whoever, because getting caught jerking off to porn has the same negative impact on a woman who thinks she's in a monogamous relationship as actually having sex with another woman.
Yeah. That's bizarre that people consider that to be cheating. Or even if you ask a lot of women, particularly in the United States, or men, if your partner thinks about someone else when you're having sex, do you consider that cheating? Right. I mean, come on. That's like, how can you not think about other people? How can you not think? I remember I was sitting in a hotel. I was in Australia shortly after the book came out. I was speaking at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, one of my favorite places. Yeah.
I want to go there.
Yeah, isn't that great? Anyway, I was giving a talk there, and I was at this hotel, and I was in the lobby, and I saw this really beautiful, sexy woman walking across the lobby. So I was watching her, and across from me there was this couple, and the man noticed the woman. Of course, the wife noticed the woman. The man pretended he hadn't noticed the woman. The wife was pretending she didn't notice that he had noticed the woman. It was this storm of ridiculousness and denial. And I remember just thinking, like, people, your life would be so much better if you could just say, hey, look at that sexy woman. And, like, yeah, she's hot. Wow. Let's talk about her later when we're up in the room. I mean, there's no reason to hide all this stuff. It's absurd.
No, I think what you're describing, and I've been down this road with many conversations with couples and people in therapy, but what you're describing is what I call the difference between someone who's psychologically still a child and someone who's reached adult level of maturity in relationship. Children still are trying to appease mommy, daddy, and God and play all the games because they're still not individuated, as Jung would say. But someone who's an adult, like I noticed, in my first marriage, look, I was with this girl from the time I was 16. I know her inside out and backwards. I've made love to her 20,000 times. And I know when she's looking and when she's wet and when she's not and when she's excited. And, when you spend your life with someone intimately like that, and you've been with each other since you were teenagers, you know them, right? There's no hiding anything. And so we reached the point where, though we were trapped in this monogamous concept, we kind of graduated to just being honest with what we saw. And in fact, I noticed that whenever one of my buddies was around, I won't mention his name, he might not like the publicity, but very good looking, elite athlete. Any girl would look at this guy and want to make love to him if she had any hormones floating in her body at all. And I noticed that whenever he was around, my first wife would get sexually excited. And so one day it just happened. He used to help teach workshops with me, and we came home at like 2 a.m. because we had a late flight. And I climbed in bed. I said, guess who's here? Would you like to make love to him? And she looked at me and she said, are you serious? I said, well, I know you've wanted to make love to him for years. Why not? We're both kind of feeling stuck. And I think, it's probably healthy for you to have that. And he was very attracted to her too. So she said, well, does he want to? I said, of course he does. So I let them go make love all night. And I left to work in the morning and left him there making love. And that was really the beginning of me learning as a male to share and not have this territorial jealousy, isolation. And then once I was single again, I still found that there was some of that in me. So I continued to practice with my buddy, and we would take girls out together and make love to them together. And I just learned to share. So in other words, I had to learn to get over this possessiveness, and really look at what is this in me. And it's really quite an adventure. You come in contact with parts of yourself that normally don't raise their head until it's a bad situation, when it's too late to analyze and too late to evaluate and heal because you've already done damage in the relationship. So for me, that practice of sharing and learning to hold the view that if she's beautiful and she's tasty and she's gorgeous and she's sexy to me, and I love one of my friends and she's interested, then why not just share the joy? Why not just share the medicine? One of the analogies I would give people that were having these kinds of problems, I would say, does your husband ever go to a massage therapist? And almost all of them said yes. I said, so you're okay with him getting a massage because he comes home happier and he feels better, but you don't want them to touch just this one strip on his body about the size of a dollar bill. So as long as the rest of him gets touched, but not that, it's okay. I said, but really all you're talking about is just a little bit of flesh that you have deified as something that belongs just to you or whatever your story is. But in actual fact, if you were really expressing genuine love and interest for his pleasure, then you wouldn't care about that 6-inch strip of flesh. You would be wanting him to come home healthy. Now, of course, they said, well, what about STDs and all that stuff? I say, well, that's something that a mature couple has to take responsibility for. But, if you let that be your limiting factor, then what you're going to end up doing is waking up one day finding out that your husband's been cheating on you for 10 years, or he's going to find out you've been doing it, and you're still risking an STD, and you're still playing the same damn game, but you're just trying to hide it from God in the closet, and it never works.
And in fact, you're actually at higher risk of STD because you're already lying. So why not lie about that too?
And when you're in the habit of lying, you attract liars to you. Like attracts like. So you get people that play the same games, and you set yourself up for a very interesting meeting with the pain teacher. That's for sure.
Earlier you asked me about the sort of origin story of sex at dawn. I talked about the moral animal and the strippers and all that. Another moment that was really important, that what I described to you was why I did my PhD work in that area. But I didn't really have much experiential work in that area yet. And at one point I was in Barcelona, and a buddy of mine was a jazz musician, and I was out watching him play in a bar. I was sitting at the bar, and this woman sat down next to me, and I'd seen her around, but I didn't know her real well, but sort of familiar with each other. And we started talking, and I was working on my PhD at the time in sexuality, in the prehistory of sexuality. And we started talking about that. And she said, so you think women are as sexual as men? I said, yeah, I think if they're free to be, if they're not afraid of being shamed or, hurt or whatever, I think they're easily as sexual as men. And she said, yeah, you're the first man who's ever said that to me. And it's true. Normally it's a secret, but you're right. In fact, I think all the time about how much I'd love to have sex with two guys, but guys are so uptight about it, and it's never happened. And I said, well, what do you think of the bass player? She said, he's cute. I said, well, when he's on break, you go to the bathroom and let me talk to him about this, because he's a good buddy of mine. And so she says hi to him, goes to the bathroom. And I said to him, like, dude, she just told me this. Are you down for that? What do you think about that? And he's like, yeah, I'm down. Like, I'm straight. I was like, yeah, I'm straight too, but whatever. I mean, I'm not homophobic. Yeah. And so we ended up back at my place, and there was a moment. First of all, she was it's a weird thing. Like, I remember being so impressed by how careful she was to make sure neither one of us felt left out. She was very, and I would think like, hey, you're living your fantasy. You have fun. Don't worry about us. But she was very like, oh, but I want to, she wanted everyone to feel comfortable. And at one point I went over to change the music or roll a joint or something. And I was sort of sitting at a little distance, and I was watching them, and they were having sex. And, I had always thought, I had imagined this situation. I'd seen it in porn, countless times. And I had imagined it would be a very sort of porny, like grunty kind of,
Yeah.
fuck fest. And in fact, they were looking into each other's eyes, and I was sitting over there rolling the joint. And what I felt was incredible gratitude that they trusted me so much that they weren't even worried about me. They weren't worried how they looked to me, if, whatever, they looked goofy or weird or what. They were just in their moment with each other, comfortable with me, comfortable with each other. And it just felt so, it wasn't sexual. It felt like trust and love and community. And that was something that struck me so hard. And that's why I started thinking about sex at dawn, is like, wait a minute. We use sex to have babies and to cement one relationship. But what if sex was used in our species to cement the intermingling, interconnected relationships of an entire hunter-gatherer community?
Which is probably more the truth.
Which is the truth. Yeah, that's exactly where my research was taking me. But then I had this experience that like brought it all home to me, And that's when I really started thinking this could be a book. This isn't just a PhD. This could be a book that could be important.
And indeed it is. And it's a good one. I'll just share along the same lines. My friend that I was referring to and I had several encounters with women. And part of what happened is when I first got divorced, it was like God was playing a trick on me, because I'd always wanted to have sex with other women, but I couldn't. But then the pain of the divorce, even though I wanted it and needed it, there was a year there where I couldn't get an erection. So the problem was I kept getting all these beautiful women that wanted to make love to me, but I could not get an erection because I hadn't healed the emotional trauma of the separation. I mean, I was with this girl from the time I was 16 and married for 17 years. So half my life was devoted to one woman. So when you go through a divorce like that, there's like something in you dies, and you have to go through a grieving process. So even though, once again, my male eye would see these beautiful women and they would offer themselves to me, but then I would have to explain to them, because they always felt insecure, like, aren't I sexy? I'm like, no, I'm still healing. And that's when I realized I got to get my buddy involved so that I can make sure that they get pleasured.
Call in reinforcements, huh?
I did, yeah. And so what happened, and why I'm bringing this up, is because every single time, the first thing that the woman would say is, this is quite scary for me. It's been a fantasy I've always had, but, I'm not going to be able to tell anybody about this. I said, well, don't worry about it. This is for you. It's your gift. Let's just enjoy this opportunity. And every single one of these women would have so many orgasms. I mean, literally, like, some of them would just be so exhausted. They'd be laying there shaking. And they would say, every one of them said, this is the first time in my life I've been fully sexually satisfied. This is the only time in my life I have ever been sexually satisfied. And I thought, geez, isn't that sad? I mean, I wonder how many women out there carry that burden and have never really been able to fully express their sexuality to the point of satiation. I mean, I know women who have enough sex drive to take down a football team. And I'm like, there's no way one guy is going to do that. There's just sexually, there's a mismatch between the male and female, unless you're on some kind of drug that can keep you erect for a very, very long time. So I found that when I was able to share with a partner like that we didn't have to be worried about whether we had the stamina to fulfill a woman, because between the two of us, we could tag team wrestle, and it worked out really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I've gotten a lot of beautiful emails from women about sex at dawn. And one that really surprised me was that a lot of women wrote and said, I really enjoyed reading your book. I had to stop and masturbate every couple of pages. It turned me on
great.
so much. Yeah.
I love that.
It's a science book,
Yeah.
it's not a pot boiler or something. But I think just hearing someone acknowledge that there's nothing wrong with you if you're a highly sexual woman is so liberating, and something I try to drum into the heads of young men who ask for my advice is that if you want to turn a woman on, you want to make a woman happy, you need to give her space to feel safe around you, to feel safe in expressing what she really feels. And once you do that, you'll be amazed at what she's into and what she's happy with. And, the places she'll even let you go if she feels you're being. I mean, I had another sort of pivotal moment around the time of that experience I just told you about, where I realized I'm non-monogamous. It's like realizing you're gay or something. It's just like, oh, okay, I'm not bi, I'm gay. This is what I'm into. And not emotionally. I've always been very interested in a very deep, unique connection with women, but sexually, like what you were saying, I can't lie. It's humiliating to me to lie to you. So it's not about you. It's not about protecting your rights. It's protecting my right to my own personal dignity. I'm not able to say to a woman like, no, you're the only one I ever think about. That's absurd. And I don't want to be with a woman who requires that of me.
No, because that's already a sign of ill health.
Right. But at the time, I felt like I'm consigning myself to a very lonely life, because no woman is going to want to be with a guy who comes right out and says, I'm not going to be your boyfriend. I don't want kids. We're not going to get married. This is the way I am. I love women too much to. And so I took this step and I said, okay, from now on, first date, first conversation, I'm laying it out on the table, and I'm going to get rejected left and right, but that's the way it's got to be. Blows my mind, because what happened was, about half the women said, okay, I'm out of here. But the other half were like, wow, tell me more.
Yep, I had the same experience, except it was more like 75% that said, sign me up. Finally, right. I can go somewhere and be myself. So, this is such an important exploration. And I think that, at so many levels, our culture and many cultures have become so accustomed to lying, cheating, and manipulating that now it's become the norm in all aspects of our culture, whether it be COVID or vaccinations or money and politics and science. It's like we're at the point now where the shadow of humanity has become so in the forefront that if we don't really take a careful look at our belief systems and our education systems, imagine what's going to happen if we keep playing this game for another 20 years. I mean, we could completely and utterly destroy each other and the planet because we're not being honest about anything. I think it's really serious.
Yeah, well, I've been reading research recently that fewer Americans are having sex than ever, particularly young people. It's just too difficult. Dating is too difficult. Everything is mitigated through technology, swiping left and right. Young men treat women like they're in a porn scene with them. They're choking them and slapping them and, doing all this stuff. Women are turned off, not into the men, not into, subjecting themselves to that kind of stuff. The whole thing is shutting down. It's pretty crazy. I mean, I'm glad to be in the generation that we're in, where it was still real and changing their bodies and all the surgery and it's just like, man, people don't seem to understand the value of inner beauty and authenticity and self-worth. I mean, the thing about women being. It's not just that half of those women were interested in being non-monogamous themselves. I think It's that they were impressed. And several of them said this to me. Like, I remember one woman said to me, yeah, I've always known men are like that, but you're the first man who ever had the balls to say it out loud. There's something about a man who steps up and says, hey, this is who I am, take it or leave it, that women find very impressive, as they should.
Well, because it already tells you that's a person who you can rely on at their word. Right. That's what a relationship is supposed to be built on, is trust. And, I tell my students and my patients, my definition of an adult is someone who says what they mean and means what they say. And until you can say what you mean and mean what you say, you are not an adult. You're still playing childish games. And it's very, very dangerous to enter into an adult relationship with adult responsibilities when you're not an adult. Yeah. And all we got to do is look on television, and that shit is rampant everywhere. And that, I think, is a force of cultural degeneration that is extremely dangerous, because remember, kids are emulating their parents, and they're picking up at an unconscious level everything that mom and dad don't think the kids are picking up. Yeah. And so we're actually training the children to carry all of our unhealed wounds and all our unhealed shadow material, except they're coming right out of the box already impregnated with this disease of our culture. And parents, actually, many of them are still trying to uphold these hardcore religious values that they themselves cannot live up to. So they're actually having affairs on the side and pretending to be in monogamous relationships, thinking their kids don't know the difference. But I guarantee you, and I know it because I've talked to the children of people in these kinds of challenges. And I've had 8-year-old girls go, oh, yes, my mom and dad think that I don't know, but I've known this for years. I can smell the changes in my father. I can see the difference in his face. I know exactly when this is going on. And I also know my mother knows, but she doesn't want to admit it. Yeah. And so, like, you have to say, okay, what are we programming into our future by living so incongruently that we teach our children that's how you navigate life? Because those are the politicians of tomorrow. Those are the leaders of establishments tomorrow. Those are the people that actually are going to be running the world when you and I are out of the game and just trying to hang in until we get to meet God.
Is that who you're going to meet? I'm going to meet Jung.
Well, to me, you're meeting God 24 hours a day, because if God is God, then there can't be anything else here. Yeah. That's just a simple fact. If God is really God, then there is nothing but God. So there's no need, I was just making a joke, but there's no need to die to meet God. If you want to meet God, go look at yourself in the mirror. Go look at the beauty of the garden and the stars at night. And, if you have to go somewhere else to find God, then you're already confused to begin with. Tumeric's really, really hot now. There's a lot of scientific research on it, but they're not all created the same. So I brought Autumn Smith on to tell you about Paleo Valley's Tumeric complex, so you know exactly what the benefits are and why you, like me, should get your Tumeric complex from Paleo Valley. Autumn, tell us about your Tumeric complex.
At Paleo Valley, we are big believers in food as medicine. And so turmeric, of course, it has beat drugs out. We know it's anti-inflammatory. We know it has brain benefits. We know it has joint benefits. But what most people don't know is that a lot of turmeric supplements only contain one isolated compound of turmeric called curcumin. And so what we did instead was create a complex. We added organic turmeric and then ginger and rosemary and clove, which were some of the most DNA protective spices studied. And we created a complex. We added organic coconut powder and pepper for absorption. And so we've created a really high quality, highly bioavailable turmeric complex that will hopefully help you to feel your best. And all you have to do to check it out is go to paleovalley.com. That's PALEOVALLEY.com. And you can use the code CHEK15, that's lowercase CHEK 15, to save 15%.
And what you're saying about projecting this trauma into the future and this falsity and all that, it cycles back to your work with nutrition and physiology and health and all that, because it's basically the same thing, right? It's replacing the nutritious food of intimacy and authenticity and looking into someone's eyes and telling them the truth. And I mean, you cannot be loved by someone you're lying to, because they don't know you, and they don't know you. So as long as you're lying, there's no love in your life, because people say they love you, but they don't see you because you don't let them see you. So you're consigning yourself, you're screwing yourself here. It's like eating junk food. You're not going to cure your hunger. It's never going to go away. I was reading some of your material about how you eat salty chips and that creates a pH imbalance in your stomach that makes you think you want more. It's the same cycles with people chase, on Tinder dates, just one after another after another. You're never going to get there. I don't know. Have you read John Sarno's work on back pain?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'll bet you have. Yeah. I think about him a lot, how, we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about family dynamics, we're talking about psychological trauma, but we're also talking about back pain. We're talking about digestive disorders. We're talking about sexual dysfunction. We're talking about, people who can't take a shit, or people who's, it's all interconnected. There's no way to escape it.
We are a holistic, integrated being. And, to expand on your point about the nutrition, I tell my clients and my students, you have to understand something about nutrition. Your physical body feeds on food. Your emotional body feeds on emotions, and your mental body feeds on thoughts. And if you have a deficit in your emotional body, it will imprint itself into your physical body. And until you recognize that it's an emotional deficit, you will try to eat to fill the emotional deficit. And the result will be ill health and weight gain. And if you have a mental deficit, because human beings are naturally creative creatures, as you know, and if we don't grow ourselves and we don't seek new adventures and new vistas, then what happens is we develop this hunger. So if you're not aware that your hunger is for mental stimulation, it creates an emotional sense of unease, which then you end up using chocolate, soda pop, sugar, and shit to try to compensate for. So you get this temporary high. It knocks you out of this awareness that you're not really satiating what the issue is. I would say probably 80 to 90% of the time when I'm dealing with people with body weight and body shape problems, it's almost always that I have to identify, or I do identify, an emotional or a mental deficit, or both, that's driving the physical behaviors that are leading to the poor diet and lifestyle choices, but they cannot be addressed. Because I can tell you, I have given thousands of people optimal diet plans, shown them how to eat for their individual needs, how to listen to their body, but they don't follow them. And when I say, okay, well, why are you not following the plan? The most common answer I get, I don't know. I say, okay, because we're not addressing the actual issue. We've got to look at your relationship with yourself. We got to look at your relationship with your husband. We got to look at your satisfaction with the work you're doing. We need to look at your relationship with whatever you call source, what you believe God is. What do you think is going to happen when you die? Because those are all the X factors that create the stress that ultimately is being medicated at a physical level. And the whole medical system keeps playing that stupid game. And it's like, okay, I tell people, don't go to sick doctors to try to get health advice. Don't go to sick therapists. Don't go to overweight nutritionists. When I was the trainer of the Army boxing team, which was a very elite boxing team, third ranked in the world, we had a nutritionist that we had to go to every, I think, 3 months it was an Army mandatory thing. This nutritionist was 5'4" and she weighed about 260 pounds. So these guys are all world-class athletes sitting there being told what they should and shouldn't eat by an obese woman. And they would all bring comic books and shit, and they would sit there and pretend that they were listening, but they're all reading, and they think that it would look like they're writing notes, but they're actually just reading magazines and not paying attention at all. And every time we had to go to one of those meetings, all sorts of them would say, why the fuck do we do this? Why do we have to listen to a fat woman tell us what we should and shouldn't be eating? It makes no sense at all. And, the coaches would say, well, we have to do it because it's Army policy. But this is the truth of everything. Don't go to an unfit athlete to learn how to be a fit athlete. Don't go to a shitty driver to learn how to drive a race car. But we've gotten to the point where people don't have any faculty of discerning a real doctor, a real therapist, a real teacher, a real psychologist, even a real athlete anymore. I mean, it's just like, okay, when are we going to actually wake up and start just being human and stop trying to be everything but what we are because we're worried about somebody else's opinion?
Yeah, that's the central question of our age right there. What do you think about, I'd be interested in your opinion on this. You read these stories about old age homes, and often the stories framed around STDs. That's kind of a funny thing. All the old folks are passing around STDs, and in their 80s or whatever, or 90s, and generally it's like one man for every 10 or 20 women in these old age homes. So that's the vector, right? The one guy gets syphilis or gonorrhea or something, and suddenly all the women have it. And it kind of gives you this impression that, the guy who's lucky enough to live into his 90s,
he's all of a sudden the stud,
is taking advantage of all this opportunity. But I think it's the other way. I think the guy who lives into his 90s is the horny guy. I think
he's alive.
But you know what I mean? It's like chi. It's the essence. The libido is the life force. And I think one of the problems that we're having in Western society is that all this anti-eroticism in the United States, particularly, all the shame around eroticism is teaching men, as you were saying, 19-year-olds who are taking Viagra. Well, they're taking Viagra because they're so ashamed of being men. Masculinity is considered to be toxic. Many of them don't have a father figure who's showing them how to be a man in a healthy, respectful way toward women. They're lost. They're trying to be good guys, but being a good guy now means essentially not really being a guy. Right. And it's tragic in so many different levels, but I feel like it's also tragic because it blocks the flow of the essential energy of life through these men.
Which is your creative life force ability. The libido is the drive of our instincts and our creativity. Someone who's got low libido has low creative ability. They have low work productivity. They have low conscious capacity. And their capacity for exploration is gone. If you ever looked at Claire Graves' structure, values tree, which you might be familiar with spiral dynamics, the values structure. Well, Claire Graves shows that whenever somebody is in a state of ill health, they're at the beige level. The next level above beige is purple, and that's the family. And above that is red, that's power drive. Then it goes to blue, which is organized religion and any organized institution. And then it goes to green, which is egalitarianism. Then it goes to what's called the second tier, which is yellow. And then finally the highest, which is turquoise. And now there's a new one coming on called coral. But the point I'm driving at is Claire Graves showed, just like Maslow did with his hierarchy of needs, whenever your body is unhealthy, you become completely egocentric. You cannot actually focus on the needs of other people because it's a survival threat. So you become completely codependent on whoever is going to fill the role of caregiver or family to you. So the point that I'm making is once the more unvital you get, the more self-centered and self-oriented you become. And whenever you have a bunch of young men in the world that have been devitalized like that, they don't have the creativity, the insight, or the energy to actually look at what's going on in the world and figure out how do we change this. I mean, when you look back to people like Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Bob Dylan and all these guys that, sang their hearts out and put themselves on the line to really say, hey, we've got to change this. We can't have all this inequality. We can't be bombing the shit out of the Vietnamese to steal shit from them. And you saw the libido, you and I were around in the early days when there was, the big psychedelic revolution and people were saying, we want to have peace. We don't want to just be destroying everybody because they don't agree with us and things like that. But so you saw that the life force energy showed itself in the music. It showed itself in the art. It showed itself in the way businesses restructured themselves. But when your libido drops down to the point where all you can do is think about how am I going to get by till tomorrow and who's going to rescue me, then the evolution of the culture is completely halted because there's no pioneers left. There's nobody brave enough to be different. There's nobody that has enough life force. When you have enough life force, I've always been I was raised on a farm. My parents only fed us the best food right off our own farm. We hunted. I come from a strong, Vancouver Island, British Columbia, rough mountain, ass kicking, skiing, motocross racing, wrestling, boxing, kickboxing, drag racing, stock car racing. Everybody was competing all the time. It was like who could lift the most hay bales. Everything was a competition because we were just vital. So when you take that vitality, people often say to me, how have you done all this stuff? And, the real truth is it's done me. And my point when I'm saying that is that when my inner compass says you need to look into this because people don't understand this, it's as though I'm being carried away by the muse of my soul. It's like my soul puts wings on me and says, you must look into this. You must solve this riddle because if you don't, it's going to hurt a lot of people because they're not solving it themselves. Yeah. So the point you see, your whole investigation into sex at dawn is the same thing. You see, okay, look, there's a cultural misunderstanding here. This is causing a lot of problems. People don't understand this. So didn't you find something inside of you carrying you?
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah. It was the first time in my life probably that I felt like I had been inhaling up until that point. And for the first time, I felt like I have something to give back now. I've absorbed so much generosity from other people in the universe. And it's exactly the way you articulated it. It's like, wow, this misunderstanding is hurting so many people. So many people are suffering unnecessarily. So if I can turn this into a book and somehow get it published and somehow write it in a way that makes people want to read it and makes them laugh and, makes them tell their friends, like I could actually help people and give something back. Yeah, that's exactly how it felt. And it's one of the best feelings I've ever had.
Okay, so let me ask you this question. If your dick wasn't working, your back was hurting all the time, your neck hurt, you had indigestion, you constantly had gas, you had a parasite infection, and you had so little energy that the thought of exercise was depleting you just thinking about it, would you have ever had the vitality, the creativity, the curiosity, and the drive to do what you did?
Of course not. Yeah.
And that's where we're at right now. We are facing a planetary crisis that all boils down to trying to live an outdated myth when in the environment's changing and only the most vital, most open, most clear vessels can channel in a new myth. But the question is, where are they?
Yeah, I was living in Spain when I was working on Sex at Dawn, and my wife, Casilda, who's the co-author, is from Africa. She's from Mozambique. She's a psychiatrist. And she had done her own research in sexuality in Mozambique when she was a young doctor. And then we met when I was finishing my PhD dissertation. And she's the one who said to me, you need to write this book. And at the time I was doing translation work. I was doing other stuff. And she was like, look, you work on the book. I'll go, I'll pay the bills. And she was running a mental hospital at the time, a small mental clinic. She would get up in the morning and go off and work all day and then come home at the end of the day and read what I had written that day and give me detailed notes. She was exhausted. She speaks 7 languages. She learned Spanish and Catalan at the same time when she moved to Barcelona to live with me. And I mean, I was inspired by how hard she was working just to support me, while I wrote it. So it's not only that I felt healthy, I felt sexually alive. I was in Spain, which I think is a very sort of an antidote to a lot of what we're talking about, because Spanish culture is very celebratory toward pleasure. There's no shame around pleasure. Even though it's a Catholic country, ostensibly, people are enjoying food. They're enjoying sitting in the sun. They enjoy talking with their friends. They enjoy a glass of wine or a little beer. And everything is about aprovechar is the word. Take advantage of life. Take advantage of whatever you're given. A small amount of high quality food is so much better than a big plate of bullshit. Yeah. That's understood here, So yeah, a lot of things fed into it. And you're right. It almost, I mean, I'm not, like everyone, I claim not to be a conspiracy theorist, but it does sort of feel like I was talking to a guy one time who grew up on a farm, a sheep farm.
I was raised on a sheep farm.
Okay.
That's what we had.
There you go. So I said to this guy, are sheep as dumb as everyone says? And he said, no, they're not dumb at all. But what happens is when you get a smart one who gets his nose under the fence and figures out how to escape, you have to kill that one. Because if you don't, he'll be leading them out over and over and over again. And so what you do is you kill the smart ones.
Sounds
as a species,
like what's going on.
That's what I'm saying. That's why there's no Muhammad Ali's. That's why there's no, Martin Luther Kings, because they get eliminated. They get their nose under the fence and no, you're not working here anymore.
You're thinking for yourself. We can't have that.
We got to get you $80,000 in debt before you even get in the job market. Because otherwise, we got to get you by the balls before you're even an adult.
Yes, and we've got to put you through medical school and completely and utterly exhaust you and dehumanize you and train you to have no interest in human beings and what the real issues behind their problems are. Right. We've got to knock the idea of relationships out of medicine.
And give you 7 minutes with each patient.
Yeah,
right?
And turn you into a robot that makes us lots of money, and we'll call that medicine. And then we'll brainwash everybody into thinking that they're going to die of a virus that nobody's ever seen any physical evidence of ever, other than images on television that are manufactured. I'm 38 years old. I mean, I'm 60 years old, but I've been in my profession for 38 years. I have not missed a single day of work due to illness in 38 years, not one day. And I've worked with sick people my whole career. And people say, well, how do you do it? I say it's actually called paying attention to what it takes to be a healthy person. Drink real water, eat real food, listen to your body, get enough exercise, spend time in introspection and getting outside of your head so you can witness what's going on inside of you and weed the garden and say, shit, all that fear-based thinking and crap and judgment's got to go because it's not really authentically who I choose to be or who I want to become. Everybody just wants to let the garden take care of itself. Well, yeah, how's that working? That's like letting your kids take care of themselves and letting the politicians take care of it all. And it's just like we've deferred responsibility for everything from our sex life to our mental, emotional life to our creativity to somebody else, which is just, unfortunately, the classic hierarchical model, whether it be a religious model or whether it be a Darwinism model. And, I think if we start taking care of our bodies and getting back to, I think sex is a great way to express your creativity in either with yourself or an intimate partnership. And I know, for example, that my sex life underpins my sense of connection. It underpins my sense of creativity. It underpins the sense that I've got tribe and love in my life. And so if the intimate part of my life is intact, it's as though I have a foundation to spring forward. And if I jump so high that I get hurt, at least I know I have people to love me that can put me back together again, Yeah. And I think that's just what's missing so seriously in our culture. Many of you are aware of the importance of magnesium, but very few are aware that most of the magnesium products out there are not high quality and seldom do what they say they'll do on the bottle or the package. But Bioptimizers has produced the most comprehensive magnesium breakthrough product on the market. I've got Wade here to tell us a little bit about it. Wade, what makes your magnesium breakthrough product so unique?
Well, I think because we combine a variety of magnesiums. In fact, we use 7 different types. So if you look at all the research papers out there, you'll see that they'll use various magnesiums, whether it's orotate, malate, sucrosomial is a hot one that's just come out recently, and they're rated on bioavailability. But the biggest component that a lot of people don't understand with magnesium is that different types of magnesium are uptaken by different parts of the body or different organs, some in your brain, some in your nervous system, some are vasodilators. And so there's a variance in people's responses depending on what they need magnesium for. So we went out to try and solve this problem by combining all 7 of the best magnesiums into one single capsule, which was very difficult because number one, the bonding size was different. The nozzles for the machines wouldn't work. We don't use any fillers or chemical excipients, that's the flow regulators. And then we got them in the caps, and the caps rose. We had to do specialized caps. But when we solved all those problems and turned it out for ourselves, because we were tired of buying, I had a whole counter full of magnesiums. Well, guess what? A lot of people said this was the best magnesium product they've ever taken. And after being in this business for 18 years, it's quickly moved to our number 1 selling product in Bioptimizer history.
What are just 2 or 3 things that magnesium is really supportive of? I know sleep challenges is one of them. What are some of the other key issues?
Well, it acts as a down regulator for your nervous system to kind of help you relax and go into, out of fight or flight. And that's the biggest factor, especially today in a high blue light electromagnetic frequency world that we find ourselves in, a high stimulus environment. It's also critical for vasodilation. And vasodilation increases blood flow. And many times when we are suffering from a variety of pain or conditions in the body, it's because we're not getting oxygen in or toxins out of those tissues. And you've written a lot about it in your work. And so magnesium breakthrough, because it's so powerful and not available in most North American diets because of what we've done with farming, it's a great way to augment your diet. And it's easy to get. You go to magnesiumbreakthrough.com or magbreakthrough.com/living4D. You can get a 10% discount, and it's a money back guarantee. If it's not the best magnesium you've ever taken, you get your money back.
MAG breakthrough.com, magbreakthrough.com/living4D. And is there a discount for the listeners?
10%
all
for
right.
all the listeners.
All right, give it a go, you guys. Everything I use from Bioptimizers is the best I've ever used. That's why I love Wade and Bioptimizers. So you've heard how it's made, why it's made, and how it works. If you want the best, go get it. One of the things I wanted to ask is, do you have any thoughts on if we look either at the American culture or just sexuality in general? Have you seen changes over time that you can say, okay, at this time of hunter-gatherers, we were like this, but then when the agrarian society started, where our sexuality changed this way, and then we came into the industrial age with the booming 20s, and things went like this, and then we got into the, what do you call it, post-industrial age, which I guess we're in now. And have you noticed a pattern of how we engage with intimacy changing as the socioeconomical, cultural, and environmental changes have come?
That's interesting. There does seem to be a cyclical pattern in that sexual mores relax. In the 19th century, late 19th century, they were quite relaxed. And then they tighten up again. There's like a pendulum swing, right? Where it either because of disease or economics or, a resurgence of religious control or something like that. So you have the 1920s, the, gay 20s, very liberal, jazz, interracial relationships sort of starting. And then the Depression, they tighten up again. Things get much more conservative and through the Second World War into the 50s, and then the 60s, they relax again. And so what you tend to have, if you look at these periods, is when the sexual mores are relaxing is a time of surging autonomy and respect for women. Right. So the women getting the vote sort of corresponds to one period, and women getting racial rights, the civil rights movement and all that. So I think that these things are all interrelated. When we're taking care of each other and we're being kind to each other and we're recognizing the autonomy and the dignity of each other, that's reflected in sexual behavior as well.
Yes, it seems like there's a yin and a yang happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, although yin and yang work well when they're both flowing together, right? I feel like this is a resistance and then a relaxation and then a resistance. And in American society, any excuse that the society has to shut down pleasure, they use. So whether it's AIDS or herpes or, whatever, these things get blown out of proportion. I mean, there's a guy named Dan Savage. I don't know if you know about him.
I've heard of him.
He's an awesome guy. He's a gay man who's got a sex advice column.
Oh, yes. He's like a very knowledgeable about sex.
Oh, yeah. Super
I've been wanting to get him on my podcast, but I can't seem to get a hold of him.
Yeah, he's a hard guy to nail down. I've had him on my show a few times, and he's largely responsible for the success of Sex at Dawn. He pushed it really hard to all his readers and had me on his podcast and, wrote a column about it. He's an awesome guy. But I forgot what I was saying about Dan.
Something to do with his knowledge about sexuality or expressing the truth.
Yeah, no, I forget where I was going with that.
Yeah, very interesting. So I just wanted to see if you'd observe that, because, you're a trained eye. So, and you've been looking through history all the way back, as far as your book takes us, all the way up to here we are sitting here together talking about the issues. So it's interesting to see. What do you think it is? I mean, I have my own ideas, but why do you think there's this resistance to pleasure? And it seems to also come from the top, be it the church or the state or the government. I'm like, they certainly aren't resisting their pleasure. You start looking into the personal lives of these people, they're doing every damn thing under the sun, from childhood sex to weird shit to you name it. They don't ever cut back on their pleasure. Do you think this is just part of the control drama to keep people where they want them?
Yeah, to a large extent. And I remember what I was going to say about Dan, by the way, which ties into all this. That one of the things I really respect about him is back in the mid 80s, when the AIDS crisis was really a big problem, a lot of the activists were really pushing the idea that straight people could get AIDS, that AIDS was not a gay disease. It was straight people were going to get it just as much as gay people. And, Dan is gay. He's part of that community, but he's one of the few people who said, you know what, the science doesn't say that. That's not true. And I understand that you're saying that to scare straight people, so we'll get more funding for research, and that's a life or death issue. I understand the motivation, but you can't lie to people about the science. And he got a lot of shit for that and lost a lot of friends and got death threats and all sorts of stuff. But that's the truth. And I think how that ties into what we're saying now is that the society wants to shut down pleasure because pleasure is free. It's not monetized. If you and your friend are going to sit in a room together and listen to some music and drink a bottle of wine and have sex for 3 hours, the only thing that's been bought and sold is that bottle of wine. Everything else is free. And that doesn't work for American society, which is built on making everything monetized.
Profitable. It's so sickening.
Poison the water so you can sell little plastic bottles of water that's been filtered. Poison the air so you can put a filter over your mouth and get free air because you bought the filter, or we'll be walking around with air tanks on us or something. Everything has to be monetized, even friendships, everything. So I think that there's something deeply subversive and threatening to the economic system when you tell people you don't need a lot of money to have a great life. You don't need to work 60 hours a week to have a great life. All you need are friends, a roof over your head, and some good food and freedom. Free time is worth a lot more. If you start spreading that message, the whole economy starts to grind to a halt.
Yeah, but maybe it's because we've put maybe we've got currency confused. Maybe the currency, because look where this form of currency has taken us. It's destroying the whole planet. You know, we're extracting more resources from the planet by far than it can regenerate. And that's like overdrawing a bank account. You know, pretty soon someone's going to repossess your house and your car. and we're going to be repossessed shortly if we don't start taking care of nature and getting back to, you know, the joy of tending to a garden and the joy of eating real food and the joy of having family and singing and dancing and not having to watch the Super Bowl and all this kind of canned mind control shit. You see, my point is that we've got an exchange of currency to something that's now empty. You know, what does it buy you? It buys you a Facebook membership, or it buys you a subscription to a supplement company because you think you're going to get sick without your pills, or it buys you a subscription to the Disney Channel or to Netflix, which is just other people programming you with their junk largely. You know, from my studies of Joseph Campbell, I distinctly remember him talking about how he went off and lived in a cabin for like 5 or 7 years, and he just fed himself by playing in a jazz band, and he didn't have a lot of money, but he was having the time of his life. And I think, you know, I didn't have a lot of money when I was coming up as a therapist. I worked myself really hard. I spent almost all the money I had on education, but I got my passion from the exploration and from uncovering all these gems and being able to help people resolve problems nobody could figure out. And then having beautiful relationships with people that would come into my life. Somebody like you might come to me and say, Paul, I've got benign prostate hypertrophy. The doctor thinks I'm going to get prostate cancer. What do I do? And the next thing you know, I find out you wrote a book, Sex at Dawn, and I can't wait to see you every day. It's like, okay, Chris is coming to me because he's got this problem and I know the answer to that. I can help him. And I get to talk to this guy and he fills me full of wisdom. So like, I found the currency was in the exploration and the relationships and the sense of authentic internal growth and a greater degree of understanding. But today, most people aren't getting that sense of connection, growth, and a greater degree of understanding. They're getting more and more afraid, more and more censored, more and more locked down, more and more controlled. And I think it's worse than dangerous. I don't know. I mean, when you look at the situation we're in and you say, okay, what's going to happen if this goes on for another 10 or 20 years? that's not a crystal ball I'm comfortable looking at. I mean, I can do it. And when I do it, I say, shit, I better get people like Chris Ryan on this podcast and start educating people. And this is why I teach the concept of unbound play, because so many of the people that I work with are, multimillionaire executives that are very successful, but they're completely burned out. They're often dealing with multiple addictions to handle the stress of their life, be it, alcohol, cocaine, sex, pornography, a long list of stuff. But when I say, well, what are you doing in your life that has no outcome objective? They can't find anything. Everything's got an outcome to it. So I teach people things like painting and stacking rocks and going out and exercising and for a walk in the forest, or just going to a gym. And one of the things I say is, when what I want you to do is go to the gym and make yourself a promise. You're not going to do any exercise that you know. You're going to go in there and you're actually going to create something new. Try something you've never done. Every exercise you do, you got to create something new. Don't be stupid and get hurt. But if you haven't done a bench press on a Swiss ball, get on a Swiss ball, try some bench press. If you haven't done any sideways moving exercises, try pulling the cable sideways. The other thing is, I say, don't go to the gym with this idea that you've got to make yourself hurt or it's not a workout. Go to the gym with the idea, how can I enjoy my workout and leave feeling good? Right. So if you get on a stepper and all of a sudden you start feeling like you're laboring and it's not fun anymore, then go jump on something else. Yeah. Just go in there and play yourself back into vitality so that you don't have this angst toward an outcome. Like I paint, and I don't give a shit if it looks good or not. I just get the joy of putting color on the paper, feeling the experience of my emotions being moved and how it affects me at a subtle level. My kids getting involved. And I walk away from that, and it doesn't matter if the painting looks good. It's just the act of creating, because there's no other reason to do it. I'm not a musician, but I use sound healing and I teach sound healing. And I just taught a sound healing workshop right here at our house. I had 22 people in class. 85% of them had never played a musical instrument in their life. A lot of them were making a career change and had a genuine interest in sound healing, because it's something they can do in this kind of COVID environment. It's easy. They don't have to go anywhere. They can do certain parts of it on the internet. The point being is, after 2 days, the way I ended it was, I said, okay, grab an instrument, whatever it is. Don't think about it, just whatever calls you. Rattles, drum, guitar, percussion sticks, Tibetan bowl, I don't care. And so I just said, okay, now let's just make love to each other. Let's do it through the instruments. Just say I love you through your instrument, and let's have a conversation together with no words, just these instruments. And my God, let me tell you, the jam sessions that came out, and I want to share, we did 4 rounds of that, probably for about 45 minutes. Every single person in that room concluded that was the best workshop they'd ever been to in their life. Why? Not because I was teaching them rocket science, but because I gave them permission to have no judgment, no outcome, and just to express themselves authentically and have fun doing it, and don't give a shit about what the guy next to you is doing. Just find the rhythm, and if you can add something to it, let's talk to each other musically. And it blew people wide open. I saw age fall off of them. I saw eyes get bright. I saw smiles come back. I saw many of them saying, oh, let's get together and do this again, swapping, connect contacts. Let's practice having fun together. And I think this goes right back to sex. People have lost their ability to have sex for fun instead of just dumping a load or reducing stress so you can roll over and go to sleep. Right. What about the exploration of it? What about making it fun and interesting, and that's gone too. The other thing I wanted to bring up with you is, last time I did research on this, I found that the statistics showed that the average person today, the average marriage lasts 2.5 years, and the average person's married 3 times in their lifetime. Well, when I saw that, I said, well, that certainly doesn't bode well for the till death do you part religious ideology. And when you look at reports like the Kinsey report and you see the statistics on people who are cheating and other reports like it, it seems like that validates sex at dawn.
Yeah, that doesn't look like monogamy, does it?
No. These are the very people that would attack that book because it goes against their religious values, but none of them are living those values. Well, most of them are not living those values. So here we are again into this kind of double agent, double life. Yeah. One in the closet, one in the conformity of the group. I'm just curious what your thoughts are in that regard.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've been dealing with that for a long time, since before the book came out. When I was just doing my doctoral research, I'd be at a cocktail party and somebody would say, "Oh, Chris is writing about human sexual behavior in prehistory. He's reading all this stuff about bonobos." And somebody would say, "Oh, yeah, what's that? What are you doing? And I'd say, well, basically, I've concluded that, sexual monogamy is not natural to humans. It's a cultural construct that we're all living under, and a lot of us are suffering. And you could see about half the people in the party were like, "Oh my God, that's really interesting." And half the people were like, "I gotta go. Time to go, honey. We're going home."
This guy might try to pick up on my wife.
or just expose my bullshit,
Yes, that's probably the real issue.
Yeah. So, it's hard. I mean, I'm sure you deal with it as well. People, when you're wedded to a false life, you're either desperate for someone to tell you the truth, or you're desperate for them not to.
Yes, because then you have to look at what you've created for yourself.
Right. And what you've been doing to other people. So, yeah, it's tough. And I, but I'm very compassionate toward them. I try to be, because, it's a great luxury to be able to speak your truth and to be true to yourself. You and I, you've got an independent source of income. You've got your institute, you've got your books, you've got your practice. You're not working for Goldman Sachs or, General Electric or Raytheon. You can't be fired for saying the things that you've just said in the last couple hours, and neither can I. That's a huge luxury that most people don't have. And so, I think we need to keep that in mind. It's hard to ask people to step up and tell the truth if you might lose your family or your job or your kids or, your house.
Oh yeah, a buddy of mine just lost his job because he didn't want to conform to all the COVID restrictions, and he brought piles of research to the company he works in, showed it to the higher ups, and said, "Look, you're playing a very dangerous game, and ultimately it's going to weaken your whole corporation. You're going to have a lot more illness." And he said, "Look around. I'm by far the healthiest person in this whole corporation, and everybody knows that. And you're not listening to me, and you're not listening to the truth. You're just listening to what you're being told to by people that have ulterior motives, and you should be able to see that." And they hummed and hawed, but ultimately what they did is they pushed him out of the company he'd been working for many years as their top salesman and producer, because they were just too uncomfortable dealing with the truth. But though I agree with what you're saying, and I've crossed this path many times, as you can imagine, people say to me, "Well, you're lucky that you don't have to work for someone else and you don't have to put up with this." And I say, no, I'm not lucky at all. I made a choice. Yeah. I learned a long time ago, I don't do well being dictated to, and I don't do well being told things that I have to believe is fact when I know for a fact are not facts. So I simply use my human prerogative to make my own choice and create the life that I want to create. And every one of us has that opportunity. And I think that part of the whole thing where we're talking about with the young people not being explorative, that same disease ends up showing up in people who are willing to sacrifice their own truth, their own morals, and their own ethics for a paycheck, not realizing that you become like a prisoner who begins to love its captors and then resent everybody that's living the life that you wish you had, and then willing to bomb them, you know?
Yeah. Well, in Civilized to Death, I used the metaphor of a zoo, and, we live in the zoo of our own creation. And the zookeepers tell us how lucky we are to be in these protective cages.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's without their help, we're going to be dead from all the diseases they've manufactured.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's been fantastic, Chris. I think we've covered the bulk of the important things. I would love to continue our discussion. I'd like to get your other book, what was Civilized to Death. That sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, and if you listen to it, I read that one. I did the audio.
I'm going to get it, and let's do a podcast on that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and then when you finish your writing, or whenever you come to a good space, I'll write to Penny and remind her. But I'd love to have you on my show. I've had Wim on a bunch of times, and Joe Rogan's been on a dozen times. Yeah, lots of interesting folks. So.
Yeah, I'd love to. And my book, I don't know, it's going to be several months, but if I can get on there before and we can just talk about anything you want to talk about, then when the book's out, I can send it to you. So whatever works out is good with me. Where can people find more about you, your work? And I know your book's on Amazon. Is there any websites or anything you want to direct people to?
Yeah, I just transferred all my stuff to Substack. So, chrisryan.substack.com. The podcast is there. I do writing there, photos. I'm sort of pulled back from social media. So I'm putting everything in one place with no algorithms and no ads and no bullshit. It's just all there.
So Chris Ryan at substack.com?
Yeah, chrisryan.substack.com.
Oh,
yeah.
.substack.
That's the website. And then I have my own site as well, which is thatchrisryan.com.
That Chris Ryan?
Yeah.
That Chris Ryan.
Not the other Chris Ryans.
Good. Awesome, Chris. Thank you. I not only do I want to say thank you for the book, I want to say thank you for being brave enough to be yourself. My God, it's such a pleasure to talk to someone who is brave enough to really be themselves and explore and take so many of us on a journey with great books and give us a chance to see what it looks like to be alive.
Thanks, Paul. We should do it in person sometime.
I'd love it.
You're in San Diego? Is that where you're?
Yeah, we're in Fallbrook, which is northeast San Diego.
Right. Well, I've got family in LA, and I go back there. I live in a van half the year. Scarlett Johansson, big red Sprinter van. So
traveling light.
Yeah, I like that. It's like backpacking, but for an older guy with a little more money. So anyway, we'll be back in Southern California in September. And so
Excellent.
I'll get in touch if you're around. Maybe we can record in person.
I'll be around. I love it. I will be around. I would absolutely love to have you here, show you our place, share a meal and hang out and just, celebrate life together.
All right, brother.
All right, Chris. Lots of love. Thank you very much. We'll be in touch. Take care.
Ciao.
Appreciate it. Bye.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Chek and today's guest, Chris Ryan. You can find Chris's books, Sex at Dawn, How We Mate, Why We Stray, and What It Means for Modern Relationships, and Civilized to Death, The Price of Progress on Amazon, Audible, Apple Books, and at all good booksellers. Connect with Chris on Twitter and Instagram at @ThatChrisRyan, and check out his podcast, Tangentially Speaking, on Substack at chrisryan.substack.com. You can find where Chris is speaking next on his website at chrisryanphd.com. Follow Paul on Instagram at paul.chek, on Twitter at paulchek, or on his YouTube podcast channel, youtube.com/living4d with Paul Chek. Watch more on Paul's blog at paulcheksblog.com and get your free subscription to Chek videos and more at the Chek Institute's new media site, chekiva.com. You can read the show notes and find links to the resources mentioned in this episode at chekinstitute.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review at the top of the show page on Spotify or at the bottom of the show page if you are listening on Apple Podcast.